Last Letters from the Living Dead Man. Written down by Elsa Barker with an introduction. Introduction. This book, the third and last of the Living Dead Man series, was written between February 1917 and February 1918. Then I lost the ability, or perhaps I should say the inclination to do automatic writing. As this third manuscript was shorter than the other two, I had supposed it to be a fragment which would probably never be finished, and it was not until my publisher urged me to issue it as a fragment that I read it all over for the first time and discovered that it was really a complete thing, an organic whole. Perhaps, I told myself, surprised and still half incredulous, there is a divinity that shapes our ends. For had this book been published when it was written, it would have seemed premature. Now the greater part of it is timely as yesterday's editorials. For the benefit of those who have not read the earlier books of the series, Letters from a Living Dead Man, 1914, and War Letters from the Living Dead Man, 1915, I will quote from the introductions of those books. In the first introduction I said, "One night last year in Paris I was strongly impelled to take up a pencil and write, though what I was to write about I had no idea. Yielding to the impulse, my hand was seized as if from the outside, and a remarkable message of a personal nature came, followed by the signature X. The purport of the message was clear, but the signature puzzled me. The following day, I showed this writing to a friend, asking her if she had any idea who X was. 'Why,' she replied, 'don't you know that that is what we always call Mr.?' I did not know. Now Mr. was 6,000 miles from Paris, and, as we supposed, in the land of the living. But a day or two later a letter came to me from America stating that Mr. had died in the western part of the United States, a few days before I received in Paris the automatic message signed X. So far as I know, I was the first person in Europe to be informed of his death, and I immediately called on my friend to tell her that X had passed out. She did not seem surprised, and told me that she had felt certain of it some days before, when I had shown her the X letter, though she had not said so at the time. Naturally, I was impressed by this extraordinary incident. But to the whole subject of communication between the two worlds, I felt an unusual degree of indifference. Spiritualism had always left me quite cold, and I had not even read the ordinary standard works on the subject. Several letters signed X were automatically written during the next few weeks, but, instead of becoming enthusiastic, I developed a strong disinclination for this manner of writing, and was only persuaded to continue it through the arguments of my friend that if X really wished to communicate with the world, I was highly privileged in being able to help him. Gradually, as I conquered my strong prejudice against automatic writing, I became interested in the things which X told me about the life beyond the grave. When it was first suggested that these letters should be published with an introduction by me, I did not take very enthusiastically to the idea. Being the author of several books, more or less well known, I had my little vanity as to the stability of my literary reputation. I did not wish to be known as an eccentric, a freak. But I consented to write an introduction stating that the letters were automatically written in my presence, which would have been the truth, though not all the truth. This satisfied my friend, but as time went on, it did not satisfy me. It seemed not quite sincere. I argued the matter out with myself. The letters were probably 2/3 written before this question was finally settled, and I decided that if I published the letters at all, I should publish them with a frank introduction, stating the exact circumstances of their reception by me. The interest aroused by Letters from a Living Dead Man, which had been published simultaneously in London and New York, astonished me. Requests for translation rights began to come in, and I was flooded with letters from all parts of the world. I answered as many as I could, but to answer all was quite impossible. Now I will quote again, briefly, from the introduction to the second volume, War Letters from the Living Dead Man, 1915. In that first book of X, I did not state who the writer was, not feeling at liberty to do so without the consent of his family, but in the summer of 1914, while I was still living in Europe, a long interview with Mr. Bruce Hatch appeared in the New York Sunday World, in which he expressed the conviction that the letters were genuine communications from his father, the late Judge David P. Hatch of Los Angeles, California. After the letters were finished in 1913, during a period of about 2 years, I was conscious of the presence of X only on 2 or 3 occasions, when he wrote some brief advice in regard to my personal affairs. On the 4th of February 1915 in New York, I was suddenly made aware one day that X stood in the room and wished to write, but as always before, with 1 or 2 exceptions, I had not the remotest idea of what he was going to say. He wrote as follows: "When I come back and tell you the story of this war, as seen from the other side, you will know more than all the chancelleries of the nations." Then I went on to describe the process of my automatic writing, adding, "No person who had had even a minute fraction of my occult experience could be more coldly critical of that experience than I am. I freely welcome every logical argument against the belief that these letters are what they purport to be, but placing those arguments in opposition to the evidence which I have of the genuineness of them, the affirmations outweigh the denials, and I accept them. This evidence is too complex and much of it too personal to be even outlined here." The second volume, which dealt with the war from the hidden side of things and predicted the victory of the Allies, aroused even more interest than the first one. The flood of letters continued. In 1916, at the kind insistence of Joyce Kilmer, I published another and different little book of automatic writings, Songs of a Wagram Angel, the angel being the beautiful being, described by X in the Living Dead Man books. The songs were charmingly received by the critics. The whole book, with the exception of 3 of the songs, had been written down in 22 hours. In the summer of 1916, I went to California, and it was there, in February 1917, that the writing of this third book began. But I was growing more and more restive at the swamping of my literary career by automatic writings, and my mountainous correspondence left me less and less time for original work. Finally, in February 1918, the inner conflict culminated in a complete cessation of automatic writing. The artist in me had become exasperated. If the reader will permit the exaggeration of the simile, I felt as a man might feel who was caught between the jaws of a lion that was carrying him away into a trackless jungle. Before March 1914, I had been known as a poet and a novelist. Since 1914, my name had become known in more countries than I have counted as a psychic, a medium of communication between the visible and the invisible worlds. I was not sorry that I had published the books, because so many people had written me that I had saved them from despair and even suicide, but I shrank from the publicity they brought me. I have been nearly devoured by these books and the readers of these books. I felt, in February 1918, that I had a right to say that the incident was closed. But that did not mean a cessation of correspondence. Suffering souls to whose letters the limitations of time and uncertain health, for I had not been well since 1915, made it impossible to respond by return of post, would write again reproaching me with indifference to their sufferings. The situation had become inconceivable, and if I went out somewhere for an hour or 2 of social rest, I was surrounded by people who wanted me to talk to them about the X books, about their own dead friends, and the possibilities of communication. I was torn by pity for those who were suffering, and after years of war, nearly everyone was suffering. But I wanted to be at the front with the Red Cross, and my health would not permit me to go. I could help various war committees, but I could not go to my tortured and beloved France, to be perhaps an added burden should I break down altogether. The only escape from this conflict was in abstruse studies where pure mind can work. So I seriously took up analytical psychology, in which I had been mildly interested since 1915. Some 14 hours a day for a year I studied, some of the time with a teacher, some of the time alone. I burrowed under the theories of the three great schools and synthesized them after my fashion. I had rather an active mind to experiment upon my own. The resistances, so-called, had been broken down by the teacher. One of the things which appealed most to my reason was Jung's insistence upon the psychological and therefore practical value of the irrational. He says, "There is no human foresight nor philosophy which can enable us to give our lives a prescribed direction except for quite a short distance. Destiny lies before us, perplexing us and teeming with possibilities, and yet only one of these many possibilities is our own particular right way. Much can certainly be attained by willpower, but our will is a function that is directed by our powers of reflection. Has it ever been proved, or can it ever be proved, that life and destiny harmonize with our human reason, that is, that they are exclusively rational? On the contrary, we have ground for supposing that they are also irrational, that is to say, that in the last resort they too are based in regions beyond the human reason. The irrationality of the great process is shown by its so-called accidentalness. The rich store of life both is and is not determined by law. It is at the same time rational and irrational. Therefore the reason and the will founded upon it are only valid for a short distance. The further we extend this rationally chosen direction, the surer we may be that we are thereby excluding the irrational possibilities of life, which have, however, just as good a right to be lived. We may injure ourselves, since we cut off the wealth of accidental eventualities by a too rigid and conscious direction. The present fearful catastrophic world war has tremendously upset the most optimistic upholder of rationalism and culture. Now my rationally chosen line of life had been that of writing books of poetry, fiction, and essays. But accidentalness cut in, and I wrote automatically and published what I had written. That destiny, that second line of life, may also have been, for all we can prove to the contrary, based in regions beyond the human reason. I should not like to say that my having led the way, in the spring of 1914, for writers of dignified reputation to publish their automatic writings might have been causally directed by the coming great need of the world for spiritual consolation during the most awful Holocaust in history. That would be pressing irrationality too far, but that second line of life, as Jung would call it, came to its inevitable end with the last of this manuscript in February 1918. The cause of that was also seemingly accidental. But as this introduction is only an introduction, it is impossible to follow the course of all the drops of water in the broad river that has flowed under my mental bridges during the last 14 months. My present line of life, and through the analysis of my dreams I have means of knowing what it is, points to the resumption of my original literary work, poetry, fiction, and essays, and to the exclusion, so far as possible, of everything that would deflect me from that course. Accidentality will cut in from time to time, change of place and therefore change of outlook, studies of all sorts, and legitimate demands by that society of which I form a part. But I have done enough automatic writing. Others will do it, if it must be done, and probably it must, because it is an outlet which it might be unsafe to stop up in the present state of the race consciousness. Of course, if I should feel strongly impelled to do automatic writing, I should do it, trusting to that destiny which is another name for causes beyond our comprehension. But it was the strength of my inner protest that made me realize that I had gone far enough along that line. As in the forewords to the former books, I state the psychological situation of the moment, saying, "So and so happened." The reader, as before, will interpret in his own way. This introduction indicates my point of view in the month of April 1919. Before the month of May 2019, I shall have solved the problem of survival, or demonstrated, without knowing it, that it is insoluble. The more we know about all these things, the less likely we are to assume that we have the sum of all knowledge. We are like children, groping among psychological lights and shadows. My own belief in immortality seems ineradicable. I did not know that until it was tested out, but we must always remember that our personal belief is not absolute evidence of the truth of what we believe, at least until we shall have examined all the psychological roots of the belief, and in the present state of our knowledge, that is well nigh impossible. Our rational belief, if we have formed one for ourselves, and have not merely accepted uncritically the beliefs of our predecessors and associates, is merely our individual synthesis, but we must not give an exaggerated value even to our own hard-won synthesis. That also is a moving and ever-changing thing, otherwise we should not grow. When a man becomes fixed, he begins to disintegrate. In the first book of this series, I stated the fact that I had never been interested in spiritualism. Consciously, I never had. Now, Dr. Alfred Adler, the head of what we may call the ego school of analysis, says, often the negation is the assertion of an old interest that has become unconscious. Yes. My father was deeply interested in spiritualism, and I was born in an old house where ghosts were supposed to walk. My mother was afraid of the subject. My father died when I was 13. I was always a little afraid of my father. The first time I met Judge Hatch, I told him that perhaps he had been my father in a former incarnation. He smiled and said, maybe. No microscopist had ever a greater interest in facts than I have. My scientific friends say, a scientist was lost in you. Other friends say, you are a great psychic. So there I found myself. In studying with the scientific half the phenomena of the psychic half, I am able to unify them. The authority of the church has been knocked from under us. We are adrift, we thinking humans of the early 20th century, upon a sea of mind, storm-tossed by winds of feeling. We were just beginning to believe in universal brotherhood when universal war broke out. Our steersmen seem to have been washed overboard. Everybody wants to take the helm, distrusting his neighbor's judgment. Is it any wonder that bewildered souls by thousands turned to automatic writing, seeking for guidance, for something authoritative? In childhood our parents guided us. Later the church guided us, or tried to. Then science guided us a little too far. And in the reaction we turned inward to find, sometimes, the unconscious more troubled than the conscious. But in the letters which follow there is no despair, only light and courage and hope. There seem to be two mainstreams in us, the mental and the instinctive. Bergson says in his Creative Evolution, there are things which intelligence alone is able to seek, but which, by itself, it will never find. These things instinct alone could find, but it will never seek them. It was inevitable that modern psychology, with its constructive curiosity, should turn its attention to the religious beliefs of the past and present. There was no other way of understanding what really goes on in the minds of people. Some of these old beliefs proved, on examination, to be scientifically tenable. For instance, the Theosophists, who got the idea from the Hindus, tell us there are two streams of evolution, the elemental and the human. Dr. C.G. Jung, the head of the Swiss School of Analytical Psychology, divides the stream of energy into two currents, one going forward and one going backward. And this duality of Will Bleuler calls ambitendency. The difference is chiefly a difference of phraseology and associations. Always the pull of the opposites. I quote from the letters which follow. The present psychic wave which is sweeping over the world is accompanied by modern analytical psychology. Truth may lie in the synthesis. Between the credulity of those who believe everything purporting to come from the other side of the veil, who accept every suggestion from anybody claiming to be psychic, who half closes the eyes and says dreamily, you will do so and so. Between this thirst for delusion and the materialist's denial that there is anything but matter and the functions of matter, there is also a middle ground. The great pioneer of analytical psychology himself said, in a recent little volume on War and Death, translated by Dr. A. Brill, in the unconscious, every one of us is convinced of his own immortality. Suppose the unconscious should be right. And by the way, between the statement of Christian scientists, all is love, and the statement of the parent school of psychoanalysis, all is libido, there is striking similarity. Jung would say, all is energy. Judge Hatch wrote, in a little book published in 1905, We postulate immortal units of force, each having the power to generate a constant but limited amount of energy, and no two alike in quantity. Upon this force generation in the unit necessitated by law do we base life. Life results from the interdealing and interplaying of these units among themselves eternally, sometimes potential, again kinetic, each limited in the amount of force generated, but unlimited in variety of motion, manifestation, or specialization. Truth may indeed be one, though the roads to it are many. Fechner's assertion that the dead live in us and so influence us does not require much stretching to fit the hypothesis that the entire past of the human race is contained in the deeper levels of the unconscious. If we go deep enough in analysis, that hypothesis is illustrated by strange phenomena. It is unwise, at the present time more than any other, even to try to take away man's belief in immortality. The world is too sad, too near the ragged edge where personal uncertainty drifts into social irresponsibility. The psychic wave that is sweeping over the world, though it is being carried to excess, as all overcompensations are, answers nevertheless to a tremendous need. Credulity is the other end of doubt. Dr. Smith Ely Jelliffe, in the introduction to his translation of Silberer's Problems of Mysticism and its Symbolism, says, "Much of the strange and outre, as well as the commonplace, in human activity conceals energy transformations of inestimable value in the work of sublimation. The race would go mad without it. It sometimes does even with it. A sign that sublimation is still imperfect and that the race is far from being spiritually well. A comprehension of the principles here involved would further the spread of sympathy for all forms of thinking and tend to further spiritual health in such mutual comprehension of the needs of others and of the forms taken by sublimation processes." William James defended the Christian Scientists, and Jung himself says in one of his famous letters to Dr. Loy, "Every method is good if it serves its purpose, including Christian Science, mental healing, etc." During the last 5 years, man has had such varied reasons for fearing objective things that he has come to fear the subjective, perhaps even more than during the Middle Ages. Dr. H. W. Frink says in his masterly book on morbid fears and compulsions, "The biological function or purpose of fear is protective or preservative. Every one of us alive today owes his existence to the fact that his human and pre-human ancestors were afraid. Nearly everyone is afraid of something. Sublime Jeanne d'Arc was terribly afraid of the fire. Perhaps she had been badly burned in infancy, and the unconscious memory twisted and turned in the deeps of her pure soul. Perhaps, and perhaps, for we shall never know. When we really know what fear is, we shall have solved the mystery of the one and the many that disturbed the cerebration of our ancestors. Fear may be a momentary surging up of the ego's consciousness of its own helpless littleness before the immensity of the unknown and unknowable non-ego. The reckless courage of the soldier may be an overcompensation, a triumphant sublimation, sometimes followed by reaction, secret or unconcealable, depending on the intensity. For, as Silberer says, the conflicts do not indeed lie in the external world, but in our emotional disposition towards it. If we change this disposition by an inner development, the external world has a different value. Man is indeed his own cosmos, the microcosm of the macrocosm, to a degree incomprehensible to one who has not intelligently studied, and in himself, the phenomena of projection and compensation, including sublimation. The great mystics of all ages, through introversion, having discovered this and reduced it to a science, after their fashion, great modern scientists like Jung and Silberer have found their systems worthy of profound study. Writing of mysticism, Professor Dwelchovers of Brussels says, "The effects of mystic union are logical and coherent. A second quality of the acts of the order of grace is the positive character of the contribution, the increase which they bring to the psychic life of those who benefit by them. The idea of God, the divine presence, or any other form of inspiration, is no more strange to the mind of the religious man than is for the savant the sudden conception of a solution long sought for, or for the artist the vision of the work which he meditates and of which he pursues the construction with patience and tenacity. Neither the invasion of the soul by God nor the return of the mystics has any resemblance to mental disintegration. It is not easy to get rid of God. Will you read what Jung says on this subject in the collected papers on analytical psychology, edited by Dr. Constance E. Long? The concept of God is simply a necessary psychological function. The consensus gentium has spoken of gods for aeons past, and will be speaking of them in aeons to come. Beautiful and perfect as man may think his reason, he may nevertheless assure himself that it is only one of the possible mental functions, coinciding merely with the corresponding side of the phenomena of the universe. All around is the irrational, that which is not congruous with reason. And this irrationalism is likewise a psychological function, namely the absolute unconscious, whilst the function of consciousness is essentially rational. Heraclitus, the ancient, that really very wise man, discovered the most wonderful of all psychological laws, namely the regulating function of antithesis. He termed this enantiodromia, clashing together, by which he meant that at some time everything meets with its opposite. Man may not identify himself with reason, for he is not wholly a rational being, and never can or ever will become one. That is a fact of which every pedant of civilization should take note. What is irrational cannot and may not be stamped out. The gods cannot and may not die. Woe betide those men who have disinfected heaven with rationalism. God Almightiness has entered into them because they would not admit God as an absolute function. Only he escapes from the cruel law of enantiodromia who knows how to separate himself from the unconscious, not by repressing it, for then it seizes him from behind, but by presenting it visibly to himself as something that is totally different from him. He must learn to differentiate in his thoughts between what is the ego and what is the non-ego. The latter is the collective psyche or absolute unconscious. In order to differentiate the psychological ego from the psychological non-ego, man must necessarily stand upon firm feet in his ego function. Obviously, the depreciation and repression of such a powerful function as that of religion has serious consequences for the psychology of the individual. One period of skepticism came to a close with the horrors of the French Revolution. At the present time, we are again experiencing an ebullition of the unconscious destructive powers of the collective psyche. The result is an unparalleled general slaughter. That is just what the unconscious was tending towards. This tendency had previously been inordinately strengthened by the rationalism of modern life, which by depreciating everything irrational caused the function of irrationalism to sink into the unconscious. There is indeed no possible alternative but to acknowledge irrationalism as a psychological function that is necessary and always existent. Its results are not to be taken as concrete realities that would involve repression, but as psychological realities. They are realities because they are effective things, that is, they are actualities. So we need not be ashamed to admit that we pray. In this grim period of history, when the soul is face to face with itself, and its brother as it has never been, we may speak with a greater simplicity than in the old conventionally smiling days before the war. I pray, and so do you, whoever you are, if only by groaning, "O God," when you suffer. Prayer is an instinct. Even an atheist will pray if he finds himself beyond human aid. A friend of mine who was killed at the front used to take Holy Communion every morning, and he was doubtless a saner and better soldier for it. One need not be a Roman Catholic to see the beauty of that act of faith. Whether God be a dominant of the superpersonal unconscious, a psychological function, or a mathematical equation, makes not the slightest difference to me. As William James would say, he works. And whether the souls of our dead live in us, as Fechner says, or whether they are relics in the personal and collective unconscious, or whether they are concrete realities that can materialize by using astral and etheric substance, makes also not the slightest difference to me. If you could know how utterly I am at peace about this whole question, and many other differences appear, on close examination, to be mainly differences of viewpoint and phraseology. The astral world of the theosophists, medieval and modern, corresponds to a certain level of the unconscious. X says in one of the letters which follow, written in 1917, that melancholy may be produced by the pressure of the unhappy dead who make us fear. If you locate the dead in the unconscious, which surges up in moments of passivity, the dead will have the same effect. Having given much of the leisure time of a laborious life to a study of the theories and practices of mysticism and occultism, as formulated by many different schools, I could write volumes, if I had the inclination, which I have not, in tracing out the psychological roots and the relations between these things. My own unconscious is rich with such images. Some of the most striking parallels have not been written about, so far as I know. And Jung seems to have covered, with the wide mantle of his comprehension, even the frailties of those who believe in prophetic dreams. He says, "The unconscious possesses possibilities of wisdom that are completely closed to consciousness, for the unconscious has at its disposal not only all the psychic contents that are under the threshold because they have been forgotten or overlooked, but also the wisdom of the experience of untold ages, deposited in the course of time and lying potential in the human brain. The unconscious is continually active, creating combinations of its materials. These serve to indicate the future path of the individual. It creates prospective combinations just as our consciousness does, only they are considerably superior to the conscious combinations both in refinement and extent. The unconscious may therefore be an unparalleled guide for human beings. The unconscious must contain all the material that has not yet reached the level of consciousness. These are the germs of future conscious contents. He seems to think that true prophecies are merely the result of synthesis by the unconscious of tendencies, whether in the personal or universal unconscious, significant for future occurrences. Referring to Maeterlinck's Inconscient Superior, he says of the prophetic interpretation of dreams, "The aversion of the exact sciences against this sort of thought process, which is hardly to be called fantastic, is only an overcompensation of the thousands of years old, but all too great inclination of man to believe in soothsaying. I am told that the hearing of voices in the hypnagogic state indicates a slight tendency to dissociation. Very well. Probably the voices come from a deeper level than automatic writing, whatever the inspiration of automatic writing may be." Now, while the things which X in the following letters advised America to do, before America came into the war, were the very things which we did after we came into the war, and which we could not have done except as war measures, our entrance was not written down as a specific prophecy in these letters. Any startling prophecy has always had a tendency to shake me out of the passive state in which automatic writing is possible. But, during the weeks from February to April 1917, in the hypnagogic state preceding sleep, I several times heard, "We are coming into the war." Of course, I did not write that down in the manuscript, as it was not a part of the manuscript. What is heard, what is written. I merely mention it as a curious phenomenon, for it was probably the synthesis of the deeper levels of my unconscious. It was certainly the tragic hope of my conscious mind, but the conscious alone would not have produced a voice. If anybody wonders that I should admit hearing hypnagogic voices, I can only say that I regard these things rather objectively and impersonally. I never hear voices except when half asleep. If my very accurate memory has not slipped a cog, William James used to talk freely of his hypnagogic experiences. The more we know about our little personalities, the less monstrously important they seem. And the hearing of voices has more than once played a respectable role in history, before and after Moses. But I do not imagine that I have any prophetic mission, nor do I feel in any hurry to unite myself with the ocean of divinity, nor feel any impulse violently to turn my back upon the universal. There is a happy mean which makes for efficiency in life, for health and understanding. I have touched upon analytical psychology in this introduction because I am so constituted that I cannot publish this last volume of my automatic writings without indicating my point of view with the same frankness as in former introductions. Please do not blame science because I have not lost, through the analytic process, my instinctive belief in individual immortality. I assure you it has not been the fault of science. If anyone objects that I have only touched the threads of this great web of psychology which lead towards the subject of this book, I can only say that this foreword being by way of preface to this book, no other course was possible on account of the limitations of space and artistic relevancy. Psychology as a method of healing, I leave to the physicians who have written many books about it, containing bibliographies, and booksellers have catalogues. Anyone interested can write to them. This is by way of excusing myself from answering letters of inquiry. I have unselfishly and laboriously written so many hundreds of letters. Now I want to write other things. The resolution of psychological complexes frees energy for sublimation in work. It frees ideas for use in art. Dr. Beatrice M. Hinkle, in the introduction to her translation of Jung's Psychology of the Unconscious, says that this psychology which is pervading all realms of thought seems destined to be a psychological philosophical system for the understanding and practical advancement of human life. So having found a well whose waters were refreshing, I note the fact, and pass on. The train of thought which the reader has followed in this introduction is the train of thought which led me, after some delay, to the publication of the book. I am glad that these last letters from the living dead man are a call to courage, to restraint, to faith in the great and orderly future of America and the world, a call to all those positive qualities so gravely needed in these days of the rebuilding of peace. For I do not believe that Bolshevism or any other form of lunacy will find foothold in the United States. A nation with universal suffrage for man and woman certainly has no incentive for a resort to insane destruction. In the last state campaign, it was interesting to watch the reactions of women to the privileges and duties of suffrage. I watched it only in one party, the Democratic, but it was doubtless everywhere the same. There was an added dignity, a sense of new responsibility, and always courtesy and real fellowship among the women and the men. Its happening to correspond in time with the Fourth Liberty Loan Campaign and the printing of casualty lists made it all the more significant. No, these level-headed, socially responsible women will never be swept away by collective insanity, and as the men who return from the front will return to these women, their mothers, wives and sisters, I do not think that we shall lose in peace what we have gained in war. And now, remembering always that this book was written between February 1917 and February 1918, you may read The Last Letters from the Living Dead Man. Elsa Barker, New York, Easter Day, 1919. Letter 1. The Genius of America, February 3, 1917. I want to write of America, land of my latest birth, land of the future. Great is the road that the genius of America may travel, and her feet have already passed the early stages of it. The genius of America. Each land is watched over, and its children guided and moved by a genius. Would you feel the genius of America? Go alone into the woods at night, watch and listen and invoke. Perhaps the answer may come, its recognition of you, your recognition of it. If you are one of those who can hear the words which the great ones speak in the silence, perhaps you will hear something with the ears of your soul. If so, do not hasten to divulge the message, but treasure it in your heart. For that which is treasured in the heart can sometimes be felt and understood by the hearts of others. If you are one of those who will serve willingly, the secret of your heart may be shared in silence with those who can hear in the silence. The hour approaches when the mission of this land may be manifested. The hour approaches when the genius of this land shall force its will upon this land. That will not be an easy task. So many wills have sought to wrest the reins from the guiding hand. So many eyes, looking in so many directions, have seen so many goals. But there is one will so strong that it can, when its hour is come, Gather up the wills of men as a strong wind gathers a mass of loosely lying straws and sweeps them along. You know not the power of a will that has God behind it. You know not the power of a purpose that has God behind it and the future before it. Those who get in the way of the genius of this land will be broken, like straws that would resist the wind. I have watched from my unseen place the labors of many. I have helped unseen with my faith to strengthen the hearts of many. I shall wait now unseen till the act of destiny is accomplished. You who have followed me from my first gropings in the twilight of the new life, before the clearness came, you who have followed me on my journeys among the battlefields, both in and above the world, follow me yet a little further, with your minds ajar, for the entrance of the truth I have to tell you, the advice I have to give you. For my advice is disinterested as the rain, and my truth is offered as freely as the light. I have come a long way since I laid down my body a few brief years ago, years of a crowded brevity, in which the world has moved as fast as I, and sometimes with more pain. For he who knows the purpose of his pain can bear it better than the child who knows only that he suffers. I should have spoken to you before, but you would not let me. Child, would you stand in the way with your personal wishes, and your shrinkings that are also wishes of a negative kind? Blocked by your will to avoid this labor, I sought another entrance, but it was too much encumbered by prejudices and preconceived ideas, and all the litter of mental fragments that had accumulated through years of residence in a creed-bound place. You who have dwelt but briefly in many tents, have no obstructions at your door, save such as are placed by your will, and those I now sweep away. I shall pass in and out and speak to you as I choose. Letter 2. Fear not. February 8, 1917. Did I not tell you many months ago that the soul of Abraham Lincoln kept watch above this land that he died to save from disruption, and that he would keep vigil until America should have passed through her next great trial? You questioned then what that trial would be. Do you question now, and yet you do not know? Slowly the months have gone by, receding into the past. When, in the spring of 1915, you saw in vision the German Emperor in spiked helmet standing opposite to Uncle Sam in his shirt sleeves, did you not suppose that it would come to this? You are wise to keep such visions to yourself. Do not fancy that this war will end without greater changes than the world has ever known before. When I told you nearly 2 years ago that the battle between the powers of good and evil had been won in the invisible regions, I knew because my teacher told me so. But do not believe that the new age can dawn without greater trouble and greater changes than you can now imagine. Birth is change, and birth is painful, and birth is bloody and exhausting. The pains that have gone before are only the pains of labor. The stars in their courses fight for the new race. I have written of the bloody fields of Europe. Now I would write of America and her future, her near and her far future, for the sun is approaching the eastern horizon, and the dawn clouds are already tinged with the coming day. America, do not despair. Your destiny is assured. In the storms to come, think of the freshness after the storm, when the ground shall smell sweet and birds shall sing. For birds will sing to the children of the new age. In the midst of changes there will come a lull. The world will say, it is over, the old things will return, and all will be as before. But nothing will ever be exactly as it was before. In the lull you shall draw breath and make ready for other changes. Yes, many things will be changed, even the hearts of men. The world has known terror. Without experience of terror, without the poise that comes from the facing of terror undaunted, the world could not face the future without failure. Is there anything now, after 30 months of war, that could surprise the world? Is there anything that the world could not face? Oh, remember that you are immortal, and that you who go out of life will come back again, strengthened by the rest in the invisible. For a change of place is a rest of consciousness. To those whose nerves are weary, wise doctors prescribe a change. A rest in the invisible worlds is more refreshing than a summer in the mountains. Do not fear death. I passed through death, and I am more rested now than a strong man in the morning. I would not go back to my old body. When I want a body again, I shall build a new one. I know the process of building, having built so many before. Be joyous with me. A wise man once said that only the unendurable is tragic. The world and the souls of the world can endure the change that is coming. Have not wars prepared them for it? That is why wars had to be. America is rich. Her vaults are full of gold, her mines are full of ore, and her fresh soil is full of richness. Shall she fear a future in which labor can procure all things for the body, and faith can procure all things for the soul? The history of this land is a history of faith. Did not Columbus start across the trackless ocean, led only by the star of his faith? Did not your ancestors follow, led by their faith in the future? The past has gone back to God, it is safe as a dead man. But the future is coming to you, and your faith shall make it sure. Fear not. In the early days of this land, your forefathers slept in quiet, though the red man lurked in the forest, and hunger lurked in the failure of harvests, and men and children could only be winter warm when trees had been felled for fuel. Now you fear famines of coal? The earth is heavy with coal. You fear famines of wheat when your muscles grow fat for lack of exercise. They who came first to this land had varied reasons for fear, but you have no reasons for fear. Labor is sweet. The child who makes labor of play can vouch for the truth of that saying. Can you not then make play of your labor? When I was a child, I built houses of blocks. I longed to be building. I dug ditches in the garden. I made boats of chips and sailed them on a puddle. I planted seeds. And learning? In the libraries of the world and in the brains of men is stored the learning of the ages. The new age will not lack the archives of all ages. Though paper is less enduring than parchment, it will last over into the new age. Fear not! By hints I convey to your mind that many changes will come. What then? All progress is change. Go out with it to meet the future, with a smile on your face and a song on your lips. The future wears a rose in its buttonhole, as your Vagrom angel would say. Letter 3. The Promise of Spring, February 17th, 1917. When you learn to think of life as a whole, of which you are a part containing in yourself the potentialities of the whole, then you will look upon these great changes with joy. The one must sometimes sacrifice itself to itself, and by elimination secure a new lease of life. The whole, call it the race, or the earth spirit, or what you will, may grow too fat and lazy, as man may grow too large to move about with ease, and then by war among the organs, by fever, fasting, or remedies, the equilibrium is restored, and he starts again a new man, ready to face the future. Grim does it seem, but who told you that the purposes of life were always smiling? In the deeps of the earth and in the deeps of man are dark substances. The cold of winter is a hardship for those who expose themselves to the elements. But winter is the ebb tide of that changing sea of life, whose flood tide is the summer. Rhythm, always rhythm. I would not have you discouraged by the winter of the race, for the spring will come and the roses will bloom again. March winds, they are followed by April showers and May flowers. We are now in February. When the skies are dark and the snows fall, we gather round the fire and think of the future, when the flowers shall bloom again and green grass shall cover the earth, and birds shall sing in the trees. The sun crosses the line in March when the winds blow and enters the sign of the Ram, and the zodiac is traversed again by the great light giver, the sun. Do you shiver and grow afraid when the equinox approaches? The soul, too, has its winter of materialism and its ideal spring. I have looked at the world from the outside, and I see no cause for despair. I have looked at the soul from the inside, and I see great cause for rejoicing. You look forward to the end of the war, but the soul must battle to the end of its journey. So long as the soul is cased in matter, there will be wars enough, for the greatest struggles are the soul's struggles with itself. I have told you this before. Sometimes it goes out to fight, sometimes it goes in. The sword will not rust in the scabbard. Think less of yourself and think more of the race. You lose the vision of the whole by regarding too closely the parts. By regarding too closely yourself, that is only one of the parts. Think of yourself as the race, and think of the race as yourself. Then yourself becomes the race, and the race becomes yourself. The universe grows I. There was once a God so great that the cells of his body were minor gods. You may become so great that the cells of your body will be glad to sacrifice themselves to your welfare. By renouncing the will to live, you may make yourself immortal. By renouncing the will to joy, you may become joyous. Once I desired to be a great man. Now when I only desire that man shall be great, I have increased in stature myself. Once I desired to be loved, but now when I love for love's sake and not for my own sake, I am loved by a multitude. Surely I found my life by losing it, and the words of the Master were justified. I look down at the world as I once looked down at my garden. I see that the grass is sprouting, and I know that seeds are in the ground. I have planted seeds in the hearts of men that shall germinate and reach up towards the sunshine, for I had faith in the spring. For a while I have left Europe to itself and have come back to the land I love best. I have journeyed from state to state and have watched the wills of our legislators. They too are aware that a force is at work through them. They feel the responsibility of their place. They feel themselves as moving parts of the great whole, whose name is America. The flag is the symbol of their consecration. I have walked in the woods, where the spirits of the land foregather for councils which the newspapers do not report. They too are aware of their consecration. They strengthen you with their faith. When I lived as a man in America, I did not know America. To know the meaning of home, we must wander. I am all for unity now. Do not let yourselves be weakened by fear of the parts. America is a whole, and as a whole she must work. To fuse these many races together is the mission of the present hour. Do not lend your hearts to division. I see a great leader of men who shall arise in this land. His mission will be the union of races. He will be a teacher and a prophet. Letter 4. The Diet of Gold, March 10th, 1917. The very influences that now tend to disrupt this country will later draw it together. The many will find their meeting point in the one. That idea of national unity must be fostered, even to the extent of patient tolerance of racial temperaments. Those who are in the process of being separated from their old race and amalgamated with the new race feel the strain of the change. It irritates them, and their blood protests, even when their wills bid them forge new bonds for themselves. Few hyphenated Americans would be willing to go bodily back to their old allegiance. America is the most interesting of all countries, and we who see it from this side of the airy frontier see it in historical perspective. The view that is nearest to our point of view is that of your present chief executive. His eyes are far-seeing. He anticipates the clearer sight that will one day be his when he has finished his work. Our country is suffering at this moment, in March of the year of our Lord, 1917, from an indigestion of gold. You have swallowed more gold than you can assimilate, and your organs are congested. If to restore the equilibrium some of this gold should be regurgitated, by war or by other means, do not in the weariness that follows fancy that the nation is going to die. Do not be shocked by my figures of speech. I want to get into your consciousness and understanding of facts and conditions as they exist. You cannot feed on gold. Gold is a medium of exchange. When it is merely hoarded, it has lost its relation to life. A miser nation is a sadder subject for contemplation than a miser man, with his long claws and his gloating eyes. He may think, the miser man, to secure himself from the dangers of the future by amassing gold for its own sake. A miser nation may think that by amassing gold for its own sake, it can save itself from the financial dangers threatening the world after these years of war. But the miser, known as such, is in danger of being robbed and murdered, and the miser nation is in danger of being attacked and looted by other nations. You Americans want to be generous to the homeless and foodless people of Europe, but your generosity has not yet deprived of one square meal the 100 million-headed being that is America. I do not care so much what you do with your gold, but I care much what you do with your food. You are not alchemists that you can make gold potable. You are humans with delicate stomachs. Even a hen will not lay eggs for you unless she is well fed. If she protests, you can punish her by eating her, but the luckiest break of her wishbone will not produce for you another hen. Better conserve her labor power by gifts of grain, and have your eggs for breakfast and for hatching. She has periods of laziness when she wants to sit still, but put a few of her own eggs under her and watch for results. Later I shall tell you of other but no less practical ways of ensuring a supply of breakfasts. Letter 5. Contingent Fees, March 10, 1917. Today, I heard that a certain rich man, unmindful of the camel and the needle's eye, supposing that the letters from this living dead man had been profitable to you, that there was money in them, was considering the question of whether he should financially back a medium who stood ready to declare that she was in communication with me, that I repudiated the books written through you, and stood sponsor for certain manuscripts written through her as my only genuine messenger to the world. I join in your laughter at your supposed profitable investment in the securities of the other world, and at the eagerness to get aboard a sea of ether-worthy ship exhibited by people who have not paid their fare. I may as well tell you now that this country and some others are scattered over with supposed communications from me. It would seem that my writing arms are as numerous as the feet of a centipede. It would also seem by the style of some of these supposed communications, by their contents and their contradictions, that I have as many minds as Indra has eyes. Even the elementals of the Ouija board do not contradict themselves so frequently as these amanuenses make me contradict myself. I think you will have to trademark me. After the serious nature of my recent letters, it relaxes me to jest. If you include this letter in the book, please head it Contingent Fees. Letter 6. The Three Appeals. March 11, 1917. I stand outside the world and look inside the hearts of men. I see more than I saw when I was a man among them. Had I then looked as deep into my own heart as I now look into theirs, I should have seen the hearts of my fellow beings reflected in my own, for we differ from one another as one insect differs from another. There are differences between insects. I look into your hearts, O men, and this is what I see: ideals and hypocrisy, self-interest and altruism, hunger and satiety. Shall I, in offering advice, appeal to your ideals, your self-interest, or your hunger? The opposite three would never spur you to action along the lines I would have you spurred. Letter 7. The Builders. March 22, 1917. I have promised to offer you advice as to how you may restore your equilibrium. Use much of this superfluity of gold in rebuilding devastated Europe. Give her credits and give her food. You who can work in the fields, raise food to feed Europe. You who can build, give the labor of your hands wherever it is needed. You who are discontented here, go back to that Europe which gave you birth. By so doing, you will give yourselves a new point of view, and you will give yourselves a new interest. A new interest is a new lease of life. Make sacrifices. In saying that, I have two objects in view: the effect on the world and the effect on yourselves. To work for the ideal is sometimes more practical than to work for what is called the real. When I tell you to rebuild Europe, you can take it as ideal advice or practical advice, depending on your point of view. It is ideal because Europe needs rebuilding. It is practical because just now and for a time to come, America needs to get her mind on something outside herself. We give that advice to individuals when they are too self-centered. There is so much discontent and so much uncertainty that anything which can catch and hold the attention of masses of men, which can make them forget themselves, may enable them to be used by the genius of the race, which works for the welfare of the race as a whole. Lend your money to Europe, and do not ask usurious interest. Yes, you can take interest, for money has earning power, and the laborer, even the laborer gold, is worthy of his hire. But help by your generous lendings at low interest to lessen the awful burden of taxation for the people of Europe, which makes also for discontent and discouragement. Go to Europe, many of you, that you may see what war does to a country, what it might do to your country should you selfishly expose yourselves to a desire on the part of outsiders to take from you by force that which you have so skillfully acquired. Go, that you may see and feel, as you can only see and feel, face to face, the spirit of self-sacrifice and national devotion which has animated the people of Europe in this long war. They have found their souls, but you have not yet found your soul. There are engineers in this country who are less needed here than they will be needed in Europe. There are specialists in all the branches of science who are more needed there than here. We have specialists enough. We can spare a few of them. Build ships. Build more ships. Keep the men occupied. Give them an objective. Do not let them brood. An idle brain is the devil's workshop. If you have not work enough, make work. There are things enough to be done. Build ships. Now, in regard to your management of railroads and other public utilities, the day for government control was heralded when the threat of a strike came that would have, if put into effect, blocked the wheels of the nation. All those public utilities whose blocked wheels could threaten the national life and the movements of men should be managed by the government. This is not socialism or any otherism. You who have stock in them, do not take alarm. A way can be found that will satisfy you. Think of the good of the whole, for you who are apart cannot prosper without the welfare of the whole. This is not Kant. It is a sort of race biology. I look down and see you as a great being, and I prescribe for you as a being, a race unity, not as a few individuals here and there. The cells in the body of the race being must all be working together. Get a unit of consciousness as a race. Yield yourselves to the consciousness of the race unit. Be as individual as you please, but be individual parts. Get into balance with other individuals, positive and negative. Make the rebuilding of Europe an objective point. Make it possible for many discontented workers to go to work in Europe. You may say that the armies of Europe, when released from military service, will furnish workers enough, but there cannot be too many. There is a double object in this, the object of getting work done, and that of the psychological effect upon the worker. I wish I could get into your minds by infusion the state of consciousness that is mine. I wish I could make you see that separation is death and that unity is life. I have spoken of government control of railroads, but that one's only the beginning. There should be governmental handling of food. Begin gradually, one thing after another. It is the destiny of the world to go in that direction. You cannot block the wheels of that chariot. Serve if you hope to survive would be a good motto. You cannot survive if you do not serve, all of you. I like that figure of the cell which is a part of the race being. It is the way I see you. Just a word about nervous diseases. Yes, it is related to what I have been saying. When at last the let-up comes after the unnatural strain of war, the minds of men in going back, or in attempting to go back to their normal state, may find themselves unable immediately to adjust to the changed conditions. For a long time the brains of men and women have been stimulated by the coffee of concerted action. When they are thrown back on themselves they may relax too much. Or, on the other hand, an unnatural excitement may drive them into all kinds of excesses. Have you ever seen victims of mania who could not rest, who had lost the ability to rest? They walk up and down and drum with their feet and clench their hands. So many men and women may be after this war. There is certain to be an excess of love excitement, and work is a good panacea for that complaint. Then again, after years of war, years in which many have not known in the morning whether they would be alive at night, they may retain the habit of dread. They may fear to rest and fear to relax. Thus they may welcome any excitement as a substitute for the stimulus to which they have been accustomed. That is another reason why I would send Americans to labor with the laborers of Europe. Not that the American working man is phlegmatic, far from it, but with his mind unaccustomed to fear anything except the loss of his job and consequent hunger, he will have an effect of confidence and hope on those around him. The American likes to feel that he is leading, and in what better way can he indulge that propensity than in leading his associates to hope? You have no idea, you cannot have an idea, of the Great Depression that will follow this war for a short while. It will be the relaxation, the letting go. Always after war, the ebb tide is followed by great activity, but it is that ebb tide which we have to consider. You in America will feel it. You have become accustomed to seeing gold flow towards these shores. When the stream lessens, you will have to combat the tendency to fear that lessening. Panics are like personal fear, intensified by mass. The world is drawing close together, and what influences a part influences the whole. After the war will also come an opening of the psychic senses of men, everywhere. This, while good in itself, may become an added danger. Prophets, true and false, will arise everywhere, with many remedies for the diseases of souls and of bodies. If I may make another suggestion, it would be that those who have psychic awakening should think twice before proclaiming the fact. It is a new sense that is coming into manifestation. But as the opening of the eyes in an early stage of evolution probably revealed as many dangers as blessings, so the new sense will reveal dangers. Do not try to close the new sense, but do not be carried away by it. Remember that it will be practically general, and like every new sense it will be defective for a long time. It will reveal false things as well as true. If a man opened his eyes for the first time upon a harmless tree, he might mistake it for a monster. Restraint in all things, moderation in all things, even in the laudable desire to action. Weigh and measure, prove before accepting anything, prove by reason and by intuition, if you cannot wait for proof by practice. Weigh and measure what I say, as well as what the wildest new prognosticator says. Discourage hysteria. A wave of hysteria is likely to sweep over the world. As revolution follows revolution, the startled inhabitants of the world may tell themselves that nothing in the universe is stable, that all is going to destruction, and that as they cannot save themselves from what seems to be universal chaos, they may as well get all the pleasurable excitement possible out of the passing moment. Restraint, restraint. I see women afraid to bear children because of the uncertainty of the morrow. I see men afraid to marry because of the uncertainty of domesticity. I see farmers hesitate to plant because of the uncertainty of the harvest. Again I say, be not afraid. If you sow, you shall reap. If you marry, you shall build a home. If you have children, the race will protect them, and you are a part of the race. Restraint, fearlessness. Letter 8. The World of Mind, March 24, 1917. I wish that more people of sane, sound mind would experiment in telepathic communication. I know there is any amount of uncoordinated and half-serious playing with phenomena, but with scientific accuracy of observation and scientific precision in recording data, not only the body of sensible literature on these subjects would be increased, but the habits of careful observation and precision in reporting supernormal facts would be developed in the experimentalists. You who write for me, continue to make and to record experiments. You are almost too cautious, but most persons are not cautious enough. Explain the necessary conditions of passivity and activity between those working together. Though the best results are often obtained by you alone, yet the testimony of one person is not so convincing as the testimony of several who have witnessed and taken part in the same phenomena. But you are right in hesitating to take on the psychic conditions of insincere and merely curious people who would like to work with you. The great difficulty with most persons is that they cannot make themselves sufficiently negative for the time being. When the experiments are over, they can and should become equally positive. They can shift from one pole to the other, and they must do so if they wish to preserve their physical health and balance. But bear in mind that the influences from this side are good and bad, even as the influences in the world are, and if you feel that any presence is hostile, at once banish it and become positive. After any approach by an undesirable influence, you should not for some hours let yourself become negative. Go for a walk or attack some difficult piece of work or read a book that demands mental activity in order to grasp its meaning. You live in a sea of mind as well as in a psychic sea. They interpenetrate, and they interpenetrate with the physical, but in working through and with them, keep them as distinct as possible. I work more and more in the mental world, and less in the astral, but the majority of my readers will not know exactly what I mean by that statement. There is a greater difference between the astral and the mental than there is between the astral and the physical. Do not despise the astral. Its dynamics are of colossal import, but cultivate more and more the purely mental, because the astral in all of you is developed beyond the mental. In my former writings, I have told you something of the dangers of the astral. Now I want to tell you some of the more obvious dangers of the mental. Those who learn that they can create in mind need to develop a sense of responsibility. They are too reckless in demonstrating their power. Remember that as you go up in the planes of being, you get into subtler and subtler regions, and strength increases with the degree of subtlety, not the reverse, as you would naturally suppose. One of the greatest temptations of the mental world is that of the creation of falsehoods. By stating that which is not true, you project into the realm of mind a picture that has a certain permanency. It may deceive others, but in time it will deceive you, its creator. Those who speak falsely cannot perceive truth. Those who create false pictures in the mental world will be deceived by those very pictures. They will reap the effects of the causes they have set up. Have you not known people who were always being deceived by their friends? They are generally those who have left deceiving pictures behind themselves. There are people who cannot discriminate between the false and the true. They deceive and are deceived. Those who deceive are always deceived, whatever their supposed intellect may be. And I would say to those to whom I now suggest experiments with clairvoyance and telepathy, that if they have planted the seeds of falsehood, they will reap a harvest of deceptive appearances. Test yourselves in that way, you who believe yourselves to be sincere. You may learn something of value regarding your own karma. Yes, I will use Theosophic or Indian terms when they express my meaning. Those who rewrite the Oriental philosophies in Western terms can pass for original only with the ignorant. What the new race needs most of all is truth. Modern science is preparing the world for the fearless facing of truth. The man who toils over a microscope that he may observe and record some fact in nature is more the servant of God than the man who with sanctimonious face tells his fellow creatures what they must not do, for his work at least is positive in its results. There are too many thou shalt nots, too few I shalls. The new race will develop a wide tolerance. It will discourage undesirable things more by ignoring them than by attacking them. By attacking a thing we give it power. Work more and more in the world of mind. The results in the physical will be immense. Letter 9. America's Good Friday, April 6, 1917. It is past midnight. It is Good Friday. Momentous decisions for the world and for all time are heavy in the souls of men. On the day that this day stands for, in the long ago, a man, who was also a god, stood forth alone for the ideas of love and human brotherhood. At last, after all these years, the thing for which he died may be realized. But there was a crucifixion on that Friday, centuries ago. I have brought you from a faraway shore that you might witness a great struggle in the souls of men. You have arrived at a center. Editor, I had arrived in New York a few hours before after a long sojourn in California. Today, in thousands of churches throughout Christendom, prayers will be offered to the God-man who died that the God in man might live. Today, in millions of hearts, the cross will be set up. It is so still here at midnight, at a few minutes past midnight on this day of days. Christianity has arisen and presses forward to Golgotha to witness an event. Pray. Prayer is the affirmation by the soul of its unity with the One. War is the affirmation of the soul of its separateness from many. Love your enemies. It is the only way that you can conquer them. Letter 10. The Crucible, April 12, 1917. Let us speak a little of this initiation through which the race is passing. Always the trials precede the attainment. When these wars are over, there will be a new world, for the souls of men will have been baptized with the fire and the blood. America must have her part in it. To her also must come the trials and the attainment. Watch and pray. Someday I will send you back to commune with the soul of the old world. Someday we will send you back. It is another Europe you will find, a Europe tried by fire, and some of it will be fine steel, and some of it will be clinkers in the furnace, for the fire proves the metal, and separates the metal from the slag. From before the war to this day, the battles of the earth have been enacted also in your soul, the blood and the fire, the pain and the travail. You too have passed through the fiery furnace. Long ago, when you identified your soul with the soul of the world, you took upon yourself the trials of the world, the initiatory trials. You also called down upon yourself the weight of your old karma, the effects of the causes you had set up through the ages. That you are at rest for a time means only that you have worked yourself free from a little of the load. Had you not done it now, you would have had to do it in the future. Rejoice for every trial that brings you nearer to the goal. And this I say for all men. If I speak of the world now, instead of that part only that we call America, it is to identify the part with the whole. If I speak of you personally, it is to identify you with the whole. Back in that Europe to which you will go, you will find two classes, those who have become fine steel and those who have become refuse. You will know the one from the other. They will welcome you back, for you have passed through the fire with them. They will welcome your country too, for it now turns its face to the fire. Be not discouraged by dismal prophecies. Man does not live by bread alone. If you have less to eat, your bodies will grow finer. If you have more to do, your minds and spirits will expand. Few of you work to your full capacity. The unit of force that is man may generate much energy, drawing it up from the deeps of himself at the call of need or of will. Work harder now, Once I told you to rest more, but the laborers are called to the vineyard. The hour of rest will come again, when the day draws near its close. In entering into the war, my country, put away all rancor, and fight for the right in which there is no rancor. Hate not, the hour for hate is past. I say this, knowing that hate and fear, the mother of hate, will come and challenge your souls. I do not hate, and I do not fear, and I shall stay with you until the day draws to its close. Are you sorry now that you let me speak again? When fear comes to your house, I will speak to you of courage. When hate shall menace you, I will turn it into love. I have found the philosopher's stone that can transmute base metals into gold. Hate will be turned to love in this land where the eagle cries. Listen to the cry of the eagle. It is a free bird and it flies high. Its message has only been hinted at in the years that have yet been numbered. The eagle will teach freedom. They will listen across the sea. America is indeed the melting pot of nations. I can find no better figure of speech. The German American who is loyal to America now, who hides the tragedy in his heart behind a brave face, may also come through the furnace fine steel. I am glad you know that they suffer. Hold the loyal ones in your heart, with all other loyal Americans, so you will help in the process of melting. To some of them, the tragedy will open the doors of initiation. Their loyalty to a pledge is a finer trial than the fire of a battlefield. Those who are loyal must not be made pariahs. Of those who are disloyal, I say nothing, but leave them to the law. The initiatory process. It has the earth in its grasp. There are those whom you love that it has in its grasp too. They suffer as you have suffered, but they shall find peace,